Seeing at 6 p.m., I'd like to call the March 4th, 2020 regular meeting of the Kenai City Council to order. If you're able, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel.
Here.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Here.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Here.
Councilmember Petty.
Here.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Here.
Councilmember Navar.
Here.
Councilmember Nackstedt.
Here.
Mayor Gabriel, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Before we get to agenda approval, Council, I'd like to draw your attention to a laydown you should have in front of you with requested revisions to the agenda packet. Action, add item D5, resolution number 2020-12, substitute resolution and substitute memo requested by the city manager. Add item J1, city manager's report, Kenai Visitor and Cultural Center report requested by the city manager. Pleasure, Council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to approve the agenda with the requested revisions to the agenda and packet listed by the mayor and request unanimous consent.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Unanimous consent is requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next up, we have the consent agenda. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Nackstedt.
Thank you. I move for approval of the consent agenda, request unanimous consent.
Second.
Thank you, Council. Is there any suggested amendments to the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll have the clerk read the consent agenda into the record, please.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. On your consent agenda tonight, you have the regular meeting minutes of February 19th, 2020, the work session summary of February 19th, 2020, approval of bills to be ratified, introduction of ordinance 3110-2020, amending Kenai Municipal Code section 23.55.030 qualification pay to add additional qualification pay items to the list of those for which employees continue to receive while on annual leave or when receiving holiday pay, and setting a public hearing for March 18th. Introduction of ordinance number 3111-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the Terminal Improvements Capital Fund and authorizing an increase to the construction purchase order to Blazy Construction, Inc. with a public hearing on March 18th. And introducing an ordinance 3112-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the Airport Improvements Capital Fund and authorizing an increase to the construction purchase order to Corellia Fire, Inc., setting the setting the public hearing on March 18th. And that is your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to any item that is on the consent agenda, which was just read by the clerk? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. I believe unanimous consent was requested. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? Is there any objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. Next up, we do not have any scheduled public comments. Next up is unscheduled public comments. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to public hearings. Under D1, ordinance number 3107-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the congregate housing funds for costs in excess of budgeted amounts. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure of council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to enact ordinance number 3107, 2020.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3107-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments, deliberation from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Councilmember Petty.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navar.
Yes.
Councilmember Nackstedt.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We're now on item D2, ordinance number 3108-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the General Land Sales Permanent Fund to transfer earnings in excess of budget amounts to the city's general fund. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Nackstedt.
I move to enact ordinance 3108, 2020.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3108-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Deliberation, comments from council? Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, so the net dollar amount is $12,987, and that will just be dispersed into the general fund. And this is a one-time only resolution, is that correct?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning. Yeah, this is simply what we had projected were going to be earnings for FY '20 ended up being less than what the actual was because we had greater returns in that fund during 19. So this does transfer that $12,000 or almost $13,000 into the general fund, and it is a one-time occurrence. It's based on the code that dictates how much we can pull out of this fund annually.
Thank you. I'm sure it'll be well spent. Thank you.
Any other discussion, deliberation from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Peterkin?
Yeah.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes.
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navar?
Yes.
Councilmember Nextet?
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Motion passes.
We're now on item D3, ordinance number 3109-2020, authorizing the city manager to reimburse annual leave used by firefighter Scott Summers for attending a paramedic internship program. This brought forward by administration. Councilmember Naxted.
Move to enact ordinance 3109, 2020.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3109-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments from council, deliberation. Councilmember Naxted.
I just want to say that I fully support this. I think but I did have one question of administration and perhaps our chief, and just that, are there any other firefighters or paramedics that have gone through a similar type of thing that's in our folds that maybe haven't been considered? This is just the most recent. Is this a precedent after the fact for some others?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Naxted, and Chief Tucker could fill us in if I leave something out. But the only other firefighter that I'm aware that went through this was Pete Coots, and he went through this 3 or 4 years ago. And actually, there was a similar ordinance at the time that did reimburse him for leave that he had to use. I'm not sure if there's others beyond that, but those are the two.
Okay, so we've got it covered, so
Yes.
I just wanted to check.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, is it possible to establish a policy that would expedite cash flow for these individuals that do intend on taking advantage of this enhanced training?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning. Yes, it is something that we could adopt. I think it would be a code change is what it would be required. I'm not confident on that. I haven't looked at it closely, but we could consider that and look at it. You know, from my perspective, it certainly makes sense that they're reimbursed for these because there's significant out-of-pocket expenses, and it does benefit the city. So, I will look into what it would take to make this consistent for folks going forward.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, I also support the ordinance and the reimbursement. I'm just interested in whether this has been contemplated in the budget and is included in the budget for the year, or if this is off budget.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Vice Mayor Malloy. I don't know if there are specific budget implications here that we're anticipating during this fiscal year. Terry, could you let us know?
Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Malloy. There aren't any direct budgetary impacts as a result. Basically, what the employee is given is over a 3-year period, so 1/3 of this amount will be added back to his leave balance. The only way that directly impacts our budget is if he then elected to cash that leave in. Otherwise, the taking of leave is already accounted for in our regular wage line within the budget. So we currently budget for every employee to cash in 2 weeks a year of leave. That's just been our practice. So I don't expect any direct impact as a result of this, and it's also spread over a 3-year period, so.
Thank you. You've completely answered my question. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments, deliberation from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Councilmember Petty.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navar.
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtat.
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Council, we're now on item D4, resolution number 2020-11, awarding a contract to provide health and life insurance consulting services, and this is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Council member Navar.
Yes, I'll move for the adoption of resolution number 2020-11.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-11? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council.
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Councilmember Clendenning.
No objection. Just reading through the memo, I guess I'm satisfied. There's what the word of art is, a bid review team, and there are metrics that you apply to the request for a proposal. Could you just give us metric 101 on this?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. So, yeah, there's a bid review team, so the request for proposals goes out. We received 2 in this case. So the bid review team then reviews each of the proposals independently. And in the case, as stated in the memo, you know, the things that we measure in this one is firm experience, staff, available resources, methodology and approach, and then fee is a component of that. So each one of those are in the matrix. Each one of them are scored, again, independently by the bid review team in each one of those categories. Then they compile them all together and then add all of the different scores together. And then in this case, the firm of, whoever it is, I've lost it here, the firm of Marsh McLennan scored higher through that process than did USI. This is this is a typical process that we go through in a lot of these RFPs, where we have a bid review team that goes through. We have a matrix, depending on what the RFP is, that they use to determine which is the most qualified firm.
Thank you for the review for my account, and people in Radio Land, I'm sure they appreciate the heads up. Thank you for doing that.
I'm sorry. Any other discussion from council and deliberation?
This is number 11?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So, just, I know I got what you just said, but the consulting services, so they consult us on how the bids look?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Peterkin. No, this is our health insurance or healthcare consultant. So, and Terry could probably explain in better detail. He works with them every year. When we negotiate the new contract for health insurance for employees, they help us navigate through that negotiation process with the healthcare insurance provider.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion from council? Councilmember Naxton.
Just a kind of a follow-up question. The contract we have with USI, was that up after a 4-year period? It started in 16 and it's up, or did we just decide in midstream at some point to go out for an RFP? It's a little unclear to me what caused us to go out.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Naxtat. Actually, Terry, if you could share with council kind of the thought process of why we decided to go back out this year.
Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Naxted, yeah, it's been 4 years, and when I sat down and talked with the HR director, you know, rather than ask for a 1-year extension to our existing contract, we thought that, you know, in light of some of the level of service that we've seen and other opportunities, we thought it might be a good time to go out and test the market again and see what else was available out there to us. So it was a combination of the age of the contract and a review of the level of service I think that we've been receiving. And we thought it was best to go back out to the market at this time.
Any other discussion from council? Councilmember Naxa?
I guess the next question just has to do with budgeting. If this was within the budget that we had prior to this, at the beginning of the year, or if it exceeds it or within it, or,
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Naxted. Terry, you could probably fill us in as well.
Mr. Eubank?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Naxted. Yeah, these professional services are lumped within the professional services in the Employee Health Care Fund, which also includes the actual health insurance we purchase and life insurance. So, that combined budget, yes, there is sufficient budget for this. This is an increase over what our current contract amount was for these services, but there is sufficient money budgeted to pay for it.
Any other discussion from council? Unanimous consent is requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-11 is adopted. Next, we're on item D5, resolution number 2020-12, selecting the firm for the Kenai Municipal Airport Engineering Services brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Navarre.
Yes, I'd move for the approval of resolution number 2020-12.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-12? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Navarre.
Yes, at this time I'd move substitute resolution number 2020-12. Essentially, it fills in the score and the blanks in the three whereases.
Second.
And request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Councilmember Glendenning.
Just to move the substitute.
Yeah, this substitute was in the laydown that we approved on the agenda. Is there any objection to moving the substitute? Unanimous consent was requested. Seeing none, we now have resolution number 2020-12 substitute. Comments from council? Councilman Glendenning.
Yeah, could we have just a little background on this? This one engineering firm has been with us for quite some time, and I know things change, and we're always looking after better service. And if we could maybe lightly touch on the change of direction. And then my real question is, there's a lot of legacy documents that are associated with the former or soon to be former contractor that we have. Is there any way those are going to be preserved, relocated, or are they just going to voluntarily have space in their office to archive them for us?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. So as far as the contract itself, Winskerthal Bryson was the former contractor. They were on a 5-year contract, which actually was a 3-year contract with 2 one-year renewals. We went through that 5-year contract, so we were required to go back out at this point, which we are every 5 years. So again, this was an RFP that was provided. We had 3 different firms that provided a proposal. We went through a matrix, not that unlike the one we previously talked about. And of course, then you can see the results of that process in front of you in the substitute. As far as the archive documentation, we have not addressed that at this point. The more recent documents that have been created are owned by the city, so and we have all of those documents. There is a significant amount of documentation I know that Winskerthal does have in their offices, but we haven't at this point talked to them about where those would reside or if we have the ability to access those. So we haven't addressed that at this point.
Yeah, there was an issue separate to this. It was maybe a year ago, and they were kind enough to take time to allow me access to their archive documents, and it was very, very helpful to us. And I'm sure there's other items in there that would be of interest. And this airport is really important to us, and there's a lot of foundational material that is lodged there. And I'd try and find a favorable disposition to where we could retain that rather than shred it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilmember Navarre.
Yeah, I was worried at first when I heard Mr. Glendenning ask about historical kind of thing, because this contract probably could go back before he was born, which is a little but my point, I guess, that I'd ask on this, I know we're going to award it as it currently is to a separate engineering, but I believe Wentworth Brycing, and I would like for the council or the city to recognize their long-term service, even though it's been a contract with the city and the airport for the job they've done, something that they can put, in there. I don't know if it's appropriate, but just because you hire, but they have done a number of years with the city, moving the airport where it is today and working in conjunction, so, but I will support this. And I guess my question is, is the appeal period still open, or the 15-day, or?
Mr. Ostrander.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Navarre, it's a 10-day appeal period that began yesterday, so we are still in the appeal period. And just so council is aware, the way that this contract is written provides maximum flexibility to the city. So even though this is a term contract, every time a project comes up at the airport, we have the ability to negotiate with our contractor that we have in the term, or we can actually go out to a separate RFP in that contract. It also allows us to end this contract at any time if we're unhappy with the firm that we've chosen here. So it does give a significant amount of flexibility to the city as far as how we handle any projects at the airport going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm glad you brought that. I did have a question regarding exactly that, the terms, because the memo said that this is generally done every 5 years, so I was just, or if that's the term of this, the cursory term of this agreement at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's a 3-year agreement with two 1-year options, and this essentially puts HDL in a position where we have the ability to negotiate directly with them on projects if we choose. But again, we have the ability to handle any project in any way we want, which includes going out to RFP with a specific project rather than going with HDL.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, having said that, then there's a process for handing over legacy information and then ongoing projects. There'd be a handoff between the two engineering firms.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gable. Councilmember Glendenning. There won't be any projects that are handed over. Any of the projects that are currently underway with Wentworth will be completed with them. HDL will only be involved in new projects going forward.
Thank you.
I guess I do have a question regarding, it's kind of a follow-up to Councilmember Glendenning's, is when there's a project that's done over there, does the city receive a set of as-built after the project's completed that we have for our records?
We should.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Councilmember Naxton.
Well, I just thought I'd chime in. I just kind of wanted to point out that kind of the good news really is that all three of these firms, HDL, PDC, and Wentworth are very good at what they do in airports. And I'm happy to see that we had all of them propose here. HDL does have a local presence in Kenai, and so they're here. Their main office isn't here, but they are. And I will frankly miss having Wentworth here because of the legacy, and, but that's really not everything, I think Corky Corthell did the first project in Kenai in 1963, moving the airport, so they kind of go back a long ways. And they haven't been the city's engineer the entire time, but a lot of it. But they certainly do have a lot of information down in their basement that is there. And you know, they're a local firm that has been here a long time, and I can't see what they'll do, but in my opinion, if it's asked for, and it may cost something because it takes time, it's there, and I think it would seem reasonable professionally for them to make it available because they care about our city. Plus, if they're not doing this, they're doing other things. So, just my opinion on that.
Thank you. Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just did want to say for the record that our working relationship with Wintz-Carthel is excellent. They are a phenomenal engineering firm. They've done a great job for the city for years. You can see that the benefits that the airport has received because of their work. So I just wanted to put it on the record there that I've personally enjoyed working with them, and the working relationship between the city and Wintz-Carthel is excellent.
Councilmember Navarre.
Yes, you know, that's my point, not to rehash, but that, you know, people bid, sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. We've had the issues when you, I didn't know HDL still had a local preference. I didn't think that was a requirement, or FAA doesn't make it a requirement, I don't think. So I don't think it could be weighted on that in this particular case. Some of our other engineering requests might be able to, but it's my understanding on airport ones, that can't be a requirement. I could be wrong. But at the same time, it seems to have gone through the proper process, and unless we hear an appeal, which I assume this won't be awarded if there was an appeal. If there's, or maybe you could just, it would come back to the council if there was, or they can only appeal it to the courts. I don't know.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarre. So the 10-day appeal period that we're in right now, the appeal comes actually directly to the city manager, and then I make a decision. I'm not sure if Mr. Bloom could let us know what happens beyond that appeal period, but I know that in this appeal period right now, it comes directly to the city manager.
Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. After the city manager issues his decision, the next opportunity for an appeal would be for the appellant to go to Superior Court. And at that point, we would probably issue the contract, and it would be up to them to get a stay of award at the court.
Thank you. Any other discussion on resolution number 2020-12 substitute? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre,
Yes.
Councilmember Knoxtat,
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Council, we're now on item D6, resolution number 2020-13, supporting Senate Bill number 232, an act relating to personal use fishing permits that would establish a fee for personal use dip netting to be used by the state and city of Kenai to support personal use dip net fisheries. This is brought forward by Councilmember Peterkin. Pleasure to council. Councilmember Peterkin.
Yes, I'd like to move for the approval of resolution number 2020-13.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-13? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember
Did I jump the gun there, Councilmember Peterkin? Wait,
No, it's
I
fine.
was giving you the opportunity to speak to it since you did bring it forward if you wanted to.
Okay, well,
As
sorry.
long as I can vote again.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I already know how Bob's gonna vote, so I'm good.
Oh,
No,
okay.
Thank you. Yeah,
That's a great strategy. I never thought of that one.
Yeah, so, no, I appreciate this opportunity. It's something that I feel is very important for our community. I think that I don't feel that the dip netting operation should fall on the residents of our of our peninsula, you know, of the Kenai, city of Kenai residents to support it. And I think that this is the first step in trying to get some help with the revenue on this to help provide the services that we're paying for. And sometimes, as it says, we don't come out every year. So I think that this will help us have a better fishery, and it'll help us cover our expenses. So I wrote it in support, asking for everybody's support, and hope that this passes.
Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I'll be supporting it, but I am concerned with the, you know, if we do make some revenue from this, hopefully, I know that there's been losses in the past year, but there's been a positive revenue in other years. I'm concerned with the cost to the fishery for the people using it, and there's Kenai residents, a great number of them that use that fishery. And so therefore, we're voting for an additional cost for them to have to pay as well as other people. I'll agree. At the same time, too, we're the ones that determine the budget and how much services we want to provide or not provide to run the fishery. And so, but I see this as a possibility where a fee is charged on the fishing permits, and then, because right now I don't think there's any permit required, and that might give us some other data, you know, with multiple years and use. Again, I don't think the kids are required to have a permit and be charged, or at least that's my understanding under the bill, that it'll be treated like a fishing license type of a permit, and the kids won't be, but it will give us data in that. So I'm okay. I just don't want it to be a free rein that if there are excesses that we can't bring down cost or find savings for the fisheries, so.
Yeah, that's a good point, Doug. Councilmember Glendening.
Yeah, and this fee will be collected by the state and then passed on to the city, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Just,
Councilmember Peterkin.
thank you, Mayor. Just for clarification, the state would not only, this wouldn't be just for our river, it would be also for the other dip net fisheries and be shared as well. And then, I think you're correct, Tim. I don't think kids get charged. It's the head of the household. Right now, you have to go and get a permit that is free, and there isn't a user fee, and it's for your family. So the head of the household, I believe, gets 25 fish, and then you get a certain amount for each other person in your family. So, but thank you.
Councilmember Naxton.
Yeah, I was ready to just vote for it, but since Robert has stopped, and you know, but this dipnet fishery has been you know, it's been a mandate on the city of Kenai, unfunded mandate all these years. We've got a budget, we've got a setup, but before that we didn't, and we had to still clean up the darn beach. And we have costs from way back, and then we've got costs since we've done it, and we went under, what, almost $100,000 this last year, 90? 2 years ago. And every year it's a bit of a crapshoot. You know, what's the fishery going to do? Is it going to go into August? As the fish, how are they going to come in, and all of that? And my opinion generally has been that the state should have been paying for the lion's share of the things that we've had to do down there all along. And I think it's about time that the state does it. And this is how the state would choose to do that, would be to charge a fee on that permit for the family or whatever, you know, head of household, I suppose, is paying it. So, you know, I'm guessing that we'll probably some years have a little bit more of a balance than other years, but hopefully, you know, it'll all go into the fishery here. Otherwise, we do risk every year just going farther into the hole. And I guess I'm not worried about it that way. Not for $5. And frankly, personally, I do the fishery myself. I run down the river, I won't be using city facilities or whatnot. I'll be on the water, but I'll be happy to pay it.
Yeah, and I'd just like to just add a few comments here that, you know, throughout the court, how we've kind of struggled with managing this fishery and balancing the needs of our local residents. We've also looked at times of exempting or trying to find a way to exempt local residents from the fees that are associated with this fishery that we charge. We weren't successful. I think we ran it up the flagpole several times and came back that we weren't allowed to do that. In regard to charging the Kenai residents, I think that we make about 8% component of the entire demographics that fish that fishery. So there's a whole bunch of other folks that are accessing that fishery. And when you talk about, you know, maybe years where we have maybe multiple back-to-back-to-back years where we lose money on it, where we could find ourselves at a point where we're, to some degree, subsidizing the fishery if we keep the services the same. So in a way, our citizens would be charged more than maybe $5 a piece just to do that subsidy. So I agree with this. I think it's a way for the state. In fact, when Mr. Ostrander and I testified before the Board of Fish, one of the board member, Woods, actually asked that question. It seemed like he was surprised that the state didn't offer, you know, an annual line item for us to help offset the cost. So, you know, I think at some level there might be an expectation like, hey, this is a state fishery. We should be helping to support it. So I will support this, and if no objection to the sponsor, I would co-sponsor, sign on to co-sponsor also, and would hope that the rest of the body would too, just so it carries a little bit more weight. Councilmember or Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Well, obviously I support this resolution, and I welcome your idea. I'd be happy to sign also, you know, in addition to the mayor and everybody else, for that. And I agree with you, Councilmember Navarre, and you know, as you know, we've had a lot of discussions over the years relating to the budget for the personal use fishery, struggling over fees and the impact of fees and trying to, you know, manage responsibly our budget for this. And we ended up creating the you know, the personal use fishery fund to better account for everything. And the very last fee that we added, is my recollection, is the $10 drop-off fee. And so I'm confident that the council's always been careful and prudent about both on the cost side and on the revenue side, and so that if, you know, obviously this can't be included in our budget for next year because we don't know if it'll even pass. And I'm hopeful that it will pass and that our support of this will help pass it. But if it does pass and there is a fee and the city does see revenue from it, I'm confident that the administration and council, you know, in their annual, in the DIBNet report and their annual review of the fishery and the expenses and the revenue will, you know, make prudent judgments about what adjustments there might be to the fee, such as eliminating the drop-off fee or whatever. So I agree with what you're saying, and I do support this resolution. Thank you.
Councilmember Glendening.
Yeah, I too will be supporting this resolution, and just thanks for all of us to sign this resolution, and the memorandum here again highlights the exposure and risk that the city has, because the state put us squarely in the fishing business, and when we go in the hole $90,000, the citizens of this town pay that. And it's only right that we ask for some relief from the state, and I imagine this will be an ongoing discussion. But thank you for bringing this forward, Councilor Peterkin, and again, I will be signing this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, just a couple things, and I agree with what Tim says. You know, I hate charging for stuff like this, but when I look at the citizens of our community having to subsidize it, then I start not hating that. But I also look at like the fire and the police department and all the things that are hard to even tie to the, when we track our costs and stuff, it's hard to say what extra, I mean, I know we know what the officer that runs up and down the beach costs, but all the other people and everything else. The other thing is I'm hoping that the state uses the criteria that they use for the fishing license, where if you're a senior, it's free, or if you're low income, it's, there's some subsidies there and other things. And then I just also wanted to mention that the state does have another dip net fishery up north in Chalitna that they do currently charge $15 for a permit there, which was interesting. And when Paul and I were doing some research, we stumbled across that. It was very interesting. But I just appreciate everybody's support, and I would like it if everybody did sign it, as long as they're all in agreement.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments from council discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre.
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet.
Yep.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Councilmember Petty.
yes,
Motion passes.
Thank you. Council, we're now down to item G5, action approval, proposed amendment to Kenai Peninsula Borough Ordinance Number 2019-24, an ordinance adopting Kenai Peninsula Borough 20.80 subdivision gated streets and gated subdivisions. This is brought forward by legal. Mr. Bloom, would you like to speak to this?
You want to put it on the floor?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Got a little ahead. I'm trying to find it on here. Vice Mayor Malloy, thank you.
So, I guess we're looking for an approval. Okay, so move to approve the proposed amendment to Kenai Peninsula Borough Ordinance Number 201924, an ordinance adopting KP 2080 subdivision gated streets and gated subdivisions.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. If you will recall, the council passed a resolution a short while ago opposing the borough's action on this ordinance, asking the assembly not to enact it. Since then, there was an amendment that was made that you have in front of you, and the assembly postponed any action on the amendment at the last meeting, in part to get the municipality's response to the amendment. It's Paul and I's position that this amendment still does not sufficiently cover the city's interest, and that we would prefer an alternate route where the borough took action to create these private subdivisions on a non-area wide basis, essentially outside of the cities. And I think that's a direction that they're willing to explore as well. So we're actually asking, I guess rather than state it in the negative, we want to report something back to the borough, and I won't speak for Paula, but I guess my request would be that the city recommends that the borough explore passing this ordinance on a non-area wide basis, that essentially they can do what they want with private subdivisions outside of the city.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that, we could vote, that the people that don't support the amendment could vote no on the motion, then we could make a different motion, to send some kind of a recommendation. I go back and forth on this. I think I think that I would agree with you in administration that it's better for this to be, to take effect in the borough, and even then I have some questions about it, you know, rather than in the city itself, because we have our own process for dealing with private subdivisions in the city, which we've done before. If I can ask and this may be unfair, I probably should have talked to you offline, but but you know, the ordinance also doesn't seem to address existing, you know, gates and existing private subdivisions. And I'm not sure, you know, like how that would be dealt with, or if there would be a grandfather situation if they do adopt this, or what the effect would be. And if they ignore us, and if they adopt it to include the city, you know, then we would have to do, that might be an issue.
Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Vice Mayor Malloy. I don't think it would affect existing subdivisions because it deals with this through the platting process. So if those subdivisions have already been platted, I don't think that this would catch those existing subdivisions. However, if this passed, there's certainly work for us to do on the city level, even to incorporate this. What this basically does is it says, hey, if you don't want to be a part of it, come up with your own way that we approve of. At least that has, one of the issues is that there has to be some sort of appeal process, and so we'd either need to create our own internal appeal process, or the borough would be handling our appeals. So a subdivider came to our Planning and Zoning Commission and didn't like the results, the appeal from that decision would go to the borough, and it just doesn't really seem to work for me.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yeah, if the appeal would go to the borough, I wouldn't support it, so I think I would vote no on this motion. I mean, I've done appeals to the borough, and they're very expensive.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yeah, I have some problems, and I guess it's not very clear in the amendment that the cities, it kind of references that the city's advisory planning commission. I know legally under what we call ours and what it's saying here would mean the same, so I'm not, but it said the subdivider bears responsibility for presentations to and discussions with the city to ensure that the subdivision plat will conform to all lawful ordinance and requirements of said city, but that's already a requirement if I understand plats and that and our process with the city, the law that we have. And there's nothing here that if the planning commission, which as you stated, in this case, I realize at times they're quasi judicial body. I don't know if that falls under this, because normally people have an appeal to the city and the council, and I don't see anything in here that protects that the council would is in the mix, and that in itself concerns me a little bit. Nothing against our planning commission, but does anybody have an answer for that, or can we amend it, or do you not have the same concerns that I do?
Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarre. So I do have those concerns, and what this does is it changes the relationship between our Planning and Zoning Commission and the borough with regard to the review of subdivision or of plats. Right now, our Planning and Zoning Commission works in an advisory capacity, so we're just really giving the borough advice. Well, this changes, and so there's no appeal process for that, because really, ultimately, the decision's done by the borough. This changes it and has our Planning and Zoning Commission making the final decision with regard to gated subdivisions, which the appeal, but we don't have an appeal process for plats here. Instead, right now, that process is only at the borough level. So we would have to create our own appeal process if this went through. And there's a time period in the ordinance, Paul, I believe it's 60 days for us to enact
60 or 120.
legislation. Again, I've been in contact with the borough's legal department, and I think there's an alternative approach that they're going to explore with regard to exercising, implementing these gated subdivision rules outside of the city. While planning and zoning powers are area-wide, there's nothing that requires uniformity that says, you know, you can't have, I mean, we already have different planning and zoning powers in the city. You know, the city of Kenai has its own zoning, and Homer has different zoning. So I don't think there's anything that prohibits the borough from having different rules for gated subdivisions outside the cities. And if we wanted to address it in our own, on our own, at our own leisure at a later date, I don't think there's anything that would prohibit us from doing that either.
Councilmember Navarre.
Is there anything time-sensitive that you know of on this ordinance? See, one of the issues I have, I think maybe Councilman Malloy, Vice Mayor Malloy referenced, is that it really didn't bring the cities into this discussion ahead, you know, and have a discussion, and even our local planning and zoning commissions, just to understand. And then you do it. I'm not trying to have this, the borough, but when it affects our cities and we're trying to figure out how to move forward, I just don't see the immediate need that I would rather vote no to this and leave our objection to the ordinance, and hopefully they'll address it, you know. I mean, that it'll, that they'll bring it back in a more written in a positive way for cities and the borough to work together, because we do share those plating, or they have you know, the authority. So I think that's just a better way. So I'm inclined to vote against this.
Mr. Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. Just, I'm not aware of anything that's time-sensitive about this ordinance at the borough or local level.
Councilmember Naxton.
I'm more than just inclined to vote against it. I think it's an intrusion on the city in this, and I guess I have a general question about if that was an appropriate time regarding the whole ordinance to begin with, and why the borough is putting this ordinance for a gated community as a plating item as opposed to an exception to an existing plat. The borough does all kinds of exceptions as far as maintenance and right-of-way width, all kinds of other things. You know, is there a really good reason why it's in this form? And this might formulate some kind of another objection or whatever, if there's, or a suggestion to them, rather than having it under their plating. It certainly doesn't have to be platted. A right-of-way doesn't have to be platted private, especially since it may be unprivate down the road. It seems like that could be a later exception that is made to a plat that's approved. And that would then put it back into the borough's purview and outside of the city. Perhaps I'm getting too far afield, asking something that that you can't answer, but I don't know why they didn't do it that way. It seems like the cleanest way, actually.
Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Nax said, yeah, I don't know the borough's rationale for taking the approach that they did. I don't disagree that there's maybe other ways to address it, but I can't speak to why they chose to approach it this way.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes, yeah, I will be opposing this borough KPB ordinance 2019-24. All it does is it sets up conflict with the first-class home rule cities where there doesn't need to be. Just in casual conversation with both councilors and planning and zoning commissioners, City of Homer, City of Soldotna, and then the flavor that I'm getting here, sitting at the Borough Assembly, listening to committee meetings, there is really no appetite, especially among the first-class home rule cities, to adopt this borough ordinance. And I think by opposing this borough ordinance, I think we'll be lending our voice and support to specifically the cities of Homer and Soldotna in their efforts. I recall discussion down in Homer, for example. They opposed it. They have and the borough has 20-some letters on file of objection from the citizens of the community. This weekend, I had a chance to speak with mayor and council members from Soldotna, and they are still opposed to it. So to me, it's a no-brainer. We need to voice our objection to it. The exception process is viable. I think I hold a record for exceptions to a borough platting or something that involved the ultimate gated community, which was the prison in Seward. The Seward representative wasn't there, so I took a time, researched it, put on my Seward hat, and moved over 23, I think, exceptions to borough code. So it can be done. They just have to set their cap right and understand that they have the ability to do it through the exception process, or they can take unto themselves zoning. We have zoning, the borough does not. This is just a lengthy way of saying that. Thank Scott for his memo, and there is no future in allowing the borough to adopt this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or deliberations from council? Councilmember Navarre.
Just real quick, I agree with Councilman Nackstead that, by passing this amendment, at least it's more compatible to the city, but I'm one of these people that I don't like, when I was on the assembly, when you would reach agreement with somebody to amend it and actually take baby steps or take it a little slower, and then they still voted against it. And that's what I would do in this case. I don't want to vote for this when I would still say, even after it's amended, I'd vote against it. I think we just have to stand our ground. So I'm not going to support the amendment, which by defeating this, I believe it leaves our current objection to the ordinance as is. Thank you.
Any other, Councilmember Glendenning?
Just one more little thing. The amendment here is expressed in this memorandum really does not speak to the roles and responsibilities that the city of Kenai has with its planning and zoning. Yes, we are advisory, and there's a Title 29 that does all of this. But when all is said and done, we have the power of zoning. The borough does not in this instance. Thank you.
Any other discussion, comments? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Navarre,
No.
Councilmember Knoxtet,
No.
Mayor Gabriel,
No.
Councilmember Peterkin,
No.
Councilmember Glendenning,
No.
Councilmember Petty,
No.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
No.
This motion fails, and was there discussion of having another amendment or another motion to reaffirm, was it to reaffirm the resolution, or? you wanted to
Would it be
vote in the
appropriate,
positive?
Mr. Bloom?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I guess the city manager and I are just interested if council is interested in doing a approval item in the positive for a proposed amendment that would be, the borough regulating private subdivisions outside of cities.
Would you like, Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just wanted to make sure that council was clear. Both Scott and I have talked to legal from the borough, and they are exploring, and I think they would be able to provide an alternative amendment to this ordinance, which would basically just remove the cities completely. And I think that's what we're asking, is if council would consider supporting a resolution in the positive, supporting an alternative amendment that would essentially say this ordinance only applies outside the city. So up to council, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Just out of care, what would the timeline of that be, Mr. Ostrander, the resolution? Are you,
It would just be a motion in the positive here.
okay, at this meeting right now?
Right, supporting that, that an alternative amendment be provided for consideration by the assembly at the meeting when they consider this, that would remove the cities completely from this ordinance.
Okay, very well. I thought you mentioned a resolution, so I just, Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you.
Can we discuss?
Thank you, Mayor. Gabriel, I'm kind of reluctant to make a motion, you know, or if a motion was made to support it, you know, at this point in time, just simply because I don't know the rationale for why this is up in front of the borough. You know, I appreciate the city attorney information on it, and who indicated that, you know, he didn't know. I know that I only represent the city of Kenai, but I do have, you know, friends that live outside the borough, and I have no idea what their view towards it is. So I guess I would be reluctant to take a position on that at this time without seeing what that actually would be, you know. And so, thank you.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Naxton?
Yeah, I was looking forward to Mr. Malloy making that motion, actually, but now that he stated why he didn't, you know, basically I got it off the table as far as the city of Kenai, and that was my main concern. But on the other hand, it kind of gets back to the long-winded question I had of our city attorney regarding why the borough is doing it this way and doesn't just make it an exception, you know, in which case, then that would be something they could do internally. It doesn't involve the city of Kenai. It doesn't have to involve the city of Kenai. And I don't know why we would need to support it one way or the other if the borough wants to do whatever it wants with an exception. So I'm not sure where they're gonna, what we would be supporting, since the amendments might be something different that's not palatable either. So I don't know. I don't really have a suggestion for a motion either.
Councilmember Navarro?
Yeah, and I too, I appreciate the discussion and taking the cities out, but that's where I said, I think this needs to be voted down, and then if there's a need or a rewrite of borough code in dealing with this, you know, there's a process that they can go through that doesn't end up like this. And I'm a little bit like Henry and Bob, is that the amendment, and it can get amended on the floor right before. So at this point, I think, you know, this is a good working item that could be addressed by the cities and the boroughs, and then an ordinance is written, and then people aren't, so they understand why and where it's coming from, and some of the questions that we have, because we don't know the overall impact even, as you know, just our city, there's areas right outside of our city that could impact this and have an adverse effect possibly on our city, and why, you know, the issues. And so I just don't understand this, and I'm just not comfortable amending it and letting the Borough Assembly, as Henry said, and as I know, which I used to sit on, they can do anything they damn well want. And if they get 5 votes.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yeah, so the action that we take, could you just recap where that stands, please?
Well, right now, there's just a suggestion that we propose an amendment that would be an affirmative, that we would allow, correct me if I'm wrong, there would be no objection to the borough continuing this on a non-area-wide basis, which include areas outside of the cities. So, Mr. Bloom?
Thank you. And just to follow up, so where we stand right now is we will make sure the borough knows. Where we stand right now, if no further action is taken, is we will let the borough know that we are still opposed to the ordinance, even with the proposed amendment.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and, yeah, we've talked around it quite a bit, and just my reading of visiting with assembly members, not to violate their Open Meetings Act, but there is sentiment not to allow gated community, gated subdivisions that would impact the cities negatively. So thank you for that explanation.
Well, I'm counting at least 4 votes or 4 opinions of not doing anything. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we're not at this point. And Councilmember Petty?
Didn't our vote just do something?
Yes. So what we did is we voted in the negative on the proposed substitute language that was in the action approval item motion. So we've done that, and now there was a suggestion that we also provide an amendment that would, in the affirmative, that would basically tell the borough, yes, go ahead and do what you want outside of non-area-wide areas that don't include the cities for their gated communities. It's a little bit convoluted. I'm probably not explaining it very, very well. I see your lights still on.
Wouldn't they be able to do that anyway?
Correct, yes, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm thinking that's 5 against right now, so I'm just,
Just for the record, I'm against it. If we send a letter, it'd be in a negative connotation for me, so
yeah.
not in a positive.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, so we are voting down Resolution 2020-01. Is that what we've done?
Yes. Well, we voted down, we voted down, the action approval was based on Kenai Peninsula Borough Ordinance number 2019-24, which was a substitute.
So we
That
were
provided
voting,
the language.
we were
and
voting on the borough legislation.
Yes, and we've done that.
Okay, and now we have a Resolution 2020-01
No.
that stands?
That
That stands?
Stands.
It's a little bit confusing, but, so, I'll let Mr. Bloom explain.
Thank you. So just to clarify, so we had a standing objection by resolution to the borough's ordinance. The borough amended their ordinance, and we wanted to take it back to council to make sure that the ordinance did not change council's position on the borough's ordinance. Council voted again that its position did not change, and council is still opposed to the borough's ordinance, even with the proposed amendments. And that's really all we have, and there's nothing further needed.
Okay, then, just process then, how will this be communicated? Be to the borough clerk and borough assembly president, et cetera?
Who wants to grab that one? Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. So we will, we can draft a letter saying that the opposition that was expressed by council in Resolution 2020-01 still was affirmed by council, even with the proposed amendment that was submitted on February 25th. So essentially a letter that explains that council is still opposed to the passage of ordinance 2019-24 substitute, even with the proposed amendment of February 25th.
Thank you. That'll be most helpful in communicating our desires to the other municipalities and members of the Borough Assembly.
Right. So,
And
so
just
it-
for the record, I would move that the city manager sends a letter on behalf of the city clarifying our position on the action that we took tonight in opposition to the amendment of Borough Ordinance 2019-24. And request unanimous consent.
Second.
Very good. Any discussion on the motion? Unanimous consent was requested. Any objection? Seeing none, that action is approved, so. Yeah. Yeah, so we voiced objection to the original ordinance 2019-24, and we just, again, voiced objection to the substitute, I guess is the best way to put it. So that brings us to commission committee reports. Council on Aging.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Council on Aging meeting for this next, what date is that, the 12th, has been canceled. And just a question, do I understand that there's going to be a presentation made over in that building regarding our budget? Did I hear that today at
March 10th,
March 10th?
6 p.m.
That'll be wonderful. I know they're looking forward to that. So thank you for doing that, and that ends my report.
Pie auction.
Pie auction, 20th.
Very good.
Yeah, and that'll be after our next meeting, but it doesn't hurt to.
Keep plugging it.
Oh yeah, because I kind of like pie. Have you ever noticed that?
Airport Commission.
Their next meeting is March the 12th.
Harbor Commission.
Our next meeting is March the 9th.
Parks and Recreation Commission.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I missed our last council meeting, so I wasn't able to give a report on the February 6th meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission. They had a full commission. Michael Bernard joined the commission that night, who was recently appointed. And Charlie Stevens was elected chair, and Grant Wisniewski was elected vice chair. The commission was also joined by River Tomerly, who is the student representative to the commission. They did talk about the May 23rd, 2020 Kite Festival. That's the second annual Kite Festival, about which the mayor talked at the chamber tonight. Main item of discussion was amending the current policy for the student representative for the Parks and Recreation Commission. And this discussion, potentially could become a template for our own student representative. At any rate, what they're doing in the commission. So they discussed it. They made some proposed amendments. The clerk and legal put them, their proposed amendments to their policy, in red line. And so it'll be discussed by the commission at their meeting tomorrow. The next Parks and Recreation Commission meeting is here. But basically, they wanted to move the potential pool of student representatives from being limited to Kenai Central High School to, being a Kenai resident and a junior or senior in good standing with school administration, at any of the schools. So that could include, as long as they're a Kenai resident, it could include Kenai Alternative High School, Wings Academy, Cook Inlet Academy, others. And they would provide that the student shall be approved by school administration. If multiple applications are received, of course, the mayor would select an applicant for appointment. And they talked about the duties and how the student, if they're not from the high school and don't have a regular body, they would communicate with other students to provide information and seek feedback from them. So they're going to look at that again tomorrow as part of their meeting, and then whatever they recommend for approval will come back later to the council to look at whether we're going to approve that or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Planning and Zoning Commission.
Just one question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Councilmember.
in your template, does that include homeschool kids also?
Yes, I'm not sure that I think it would include homeschool because I think that that would go through the Borough School District Administration. So, you know, I don't know that, so I can ask that question, you know, like, what was the name of that one? I'm not idea, okay. Thank you.
Very good. Planning and Zoning Commission?
Yes, the Planning and Zoning Commission met, and they had a new business discussion regarding extension of request by the developers, Windhaven Estates Phase 3 for a 2-year time extension, and that was approved unanimously, and there was no other items on the agenda. Their next meeting should be next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautification Committee?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. We have not had a meeting since our last council meeting, and our next meeting will be April the 14th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mini Grant Steering Committee, there is no report. On the report of the mayor, just got a few items. Last Friday, I participated in the Love of Reading over at Mountain View Elementary. They do this every year. They pull in different folks from around the community, and they sort of divide you up for rotation among the classrooms to read. You can bring your own book or have one there that they provide. It's kind of a neat experience. I've done it before, and yeah, it's fun. They usually tell a little bit about yourself, read, and then just sort of drive home the importance of reading and try to create that love of reading for them. So enjoyed that. I saw Councilmember Navarre there too, along with other members of the community. After that, I came over to City Hall here and swore in 2 new police officers. So with that, we have 1 vacancy now that hopefully we'll be able to fill soon and be fully staffed for the first time in a long time. And in addition, that also puts us on a trajectory to reinstitute our resource officer over at the high school this fall. And then today I presented with our city manager, Mr. Ostrander, our State of the City address at the chamber luncheon. Seemed like it was well received. There was a pretty good crowd there, and I just want to thank Paul and his staff for their help on that, putting it together. And there was another announcement that was made that might be of interest. Sounds like Governor Dunleavy is interested in coming to, or asked the chamber, Kennesaw Chamber, to host a joint chamber meeting on Monday for him to speak at. RSVPs, I think, are due by tomorrow. So it's kind of short notice, but I thought I'd just make that announcement that if anybody would like to attend, they need the RSVP by tomorrow. And with that, that is my report. I see, well, Chief Tucker was here, but I think we've got another meeting before his retirement. Is that right? Okay, very good. And with that, I'll go to administration reports. City Manager, Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. So administration is beginning to prepare for next year's DipNet season already. It'll be here before we know it. We had our first meeting on February 27th, and I know Council did mention earlier about continuing to try to find efficiencies and support that fishery at the least cost possible, and that is something that we're looking at again this year, looking to make to remove things that we can, or to find efficiencies to do it less expensively. Also, Terry Eubank actually was notified today that our library bonds are going to be refinanced. As you know, interest rates are incredibly low right now, and this refinancing will actually save the city approximately $140,000 over the life of the bonds. So over the next 10 years, we'll save about $140,000. At this point, we're not sure if this will require council approval or legislative action, but more to come on that. But it certainly is good news that that we're going to be saving money on that bond over the life of the bond. I also last meeting talked to council about the bike path between the Spur Highway and Beaver Loop, and the fact that things were moving on that, and even though historically those ATAP funds were allowed to be managed by the local entity, DOT has made an administrative decision during this round of ATAP funding that the projects need to be managed by DOT, which drives the cost considerably. Original estimate that we had provided during the application for the grant was about $800,000. The award actually, after first DOT review, was $1.4 million. They've now revised it to an estimate of $2.4 million for the project. So our local match went from what was approximately $65,000 to now what would require $216,000 of local dollars to support that project. There is one thing that's still unknown, in that I actually received the estimate itself from the DOT engineer, and in that it showed the DOT estimate at $3.1 million, which is another $800,000 above or $700,000 above what this estimate in this letter is. So we still have to determine what the actual number is. I've asked DOT, they haven't gotten back to me yet. Yeah. So it may be, again, and I think I mentioned last time, that we likely should push back on that administrative decision by DOT and allow, like historically they have, us to manage this project, and we could do it much less expensively. But that's going to require some additional work. So again, I'll keep the council updated as we move through that. We have completed all of the interviews for the fire chief position. Those were on Monday. We're looking to fill that position as quickly as possible. I would like to make a decision later this week or early next week for that. I met with the Kenai Watershed Forum earlier this week, and there is money again available for bacteria testing on the beach. That's about $50,000, and the city has been the grant recipient and passed that money through to the Watershed Forum to allow that testing to continue. It was a good discussion with the Watershed Forum. Initial discussions with them last year is that because they have now determined that the bacteria on the beach is, in fact, from natural causes, that it's not man-made, that they could potentially either slow down the amount of bacteria testing, do it less often, or just eliminate it completely. Based on DEC and EPA, they now want to do what's called a beach model for the area, which this money would allow. So you'll likely be seeing something, a request from the Watershed Forum for the City of Kenai again to support those efforts for next year. Last thing, bluff erosion. Actually, not the last thing. I wanted to talk a little bit about what actions the city is taking in response to the latest coronavirus or COVID-19. So really what we're trying to do is not overreact at this point. We're trying not to spend an inordinate amount of time of staff, but simply taking some preliminary measures to make sure that we have a path forward if the virus becomes more serious in our areas. Clearly, there's experts on the state that we'll be relying on. But what I have done is I've communicated with staff through a memo covering the essentials. You know, wash your hands, don't touch your face, stay at home if you're sick, those sorts of things. And I'm also emphasizing that there are a lot of unknowns still, that, you know, there are no cases in Alaska, and the impacts could be relatively small here locally. We are meeting tomorrow as department heads to discuss preparedness, essentially what I want them to prepare for. And again, I don't want them to take an inordinate amount of time, but if this thing becomes more serious down here and the state begins requiring, for example, that areas where the public gathers to be closed, how we would handle that. So we are taking some steps, and again, it's not significant, but we are taking some steps just to make sure that we're prepared in case we do have to take further action. And then the last thing, as always, is the bluff erosion project. So I actually had a teleconference with the Office of Management and Budget in D.C. on the 26th of February. Garrett Boyle from Murkowski's office set that up. And after a rather lengthy discussion where there was a general sense of confusion shared with everyone on the phone, OMB did promise that by the 16th of this month that a letter from OMB will be transmitted to the Corps. So that is the next step to getting this through. So then the Corps, the Assistant Secretary of the Army of Civil Works, would then have to take that letter and forward it on to the Capitol, which would then give us approval that allows us to proceed with a PED agreement. So by the 16th of March, we should have that letter, and then the next few steps can proceed. OMB, like I've told you before, they've had this now for, I think, 86 days, and March 16th, it will be almost 100 days since they've had it. But I did get them to promise that this would be delivered by March 16th. So that's the end of my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Peter Ken.
Yeah, I have two questions. The money that is coming to us for studying the bacteria, is that from the state of Alaska?
Mr. Ostrander.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yes, it's through DEC from the EPA.
Okay.
So
and-
through the state of Alaska from the EPA.
And they're hurting on money, so, okay, and then, the bike path money, that's from a fund, is that from the state of Alaska?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Peterkin. So that's similar. It's federal dollars that are given to the state to administer this ATAP grant funds.
I'm just, where I'm going with this is I'm wondering, the governor's coming to town, if we could reach out to him or his office and see if we could get a meeting with him to maybe visit about a couple of these issues while he's in Kenai, because if he's going out and he wants to hear from everybody, seems like we would be, maybe reach out, if it's okay with everyone else, reach out to him, see if he's got a half hour to swing by and just talk to us about a couple of things.
Mr. Ostrander.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, I was actually planning tomorrow to reach out to the governor's office to see if it was possible to set up a meeting with him and his staff while he's in town. I obviously don't know what his schedule is or how long he's going to be in town, but I do know that he's going to be by the senior center, I believe at 10 o'clock that morning, 10 o'clock the morning that he's going to be here. So 10 o'clock Monday morning, I believe he's going to be at the senior center. But I am going to reach out and see if I can set up a meeting to have a sit down with him to discuss some of these issues that we're facing.
Thanks.
Councilmember Navarre.
On the bluff erosion, I appreciate the fact that they'll be by the 16th of this month, but you referenced a lot of transferring, and that to get back to the Capitol. Was there any discussions on how long they each have to move that piece of paper through the system?
Mr. Ostrander.
Otherwise, I'd suggest they make sure when they do it, that when they send it to them, they send you a copy, and you immediately send it, even though it might be a duplicate to everybody on the loop. But I'll let you answer the question.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarre. When I referenced the general sense of confusion, it's one of the frustrating parts of this process, really, since I've become engaged in this process, is it seems that everyone who is a part of this process knows what they need to do when they have their part. However, they have no idea what happens with it when it gets to the next step. Although the person at the next step understands what they need to do. And then as they pass it on, they don't know what the next person needs to do, but the next person knows what they need to do. So there doesn't seem to be any one entity or individual that can explain the entire process completely. I would argue that it might be that I could explain the process more clearly than anyone at the federal level. So as far as timelines at each one of those stages, no one that I talked to on the phone at that point knew. In further discussions with Murkowski's office, they've indicated that when it gets to the ASACW, that they will immediately be on it to make sure that it moves to Capitol Hill, and then when it's on Capitol Hill, they'll dog it again to make sure it gets signed as quickly as possible. So they are on top of it, and they're going to chase it through to the end. But I have not got any indication as far as if they are given a certain amount of time to review the document.
And you didn't really get it. The airport is starting to get some outside siding a little bit more. And I noticed that the ceiling grid is the restaurant finally got enclosed, and the other, I'm a little disappointed. I thought it was gonna be more wood look on the ceiling, and it appears to be a lot of white, but I don't know, if you have any comments. And you referenced to us that you allocated some additional funds for furniture and that. Did that include outfitting the conference room with a conference table and chairs and a speakerphone at least, or something like that? I'm just wondering what's being looked at, or if we're gonna do some of that in this next year's budget, just to outfit that, only because I see it benefiting the city more than, I don't know if the airport's gonna charge a minimal fee, or if they're just gonna let people use it. But I see a need in our community for nonprofits, for other people to have a usable conference room that they can use, and it's very handy next to the restaurant where it can be, you can still have lunch or breakfast if you met at the breakfast. So I don't know what the criteria is gonna be, and you don't have to answer that today, but I would like to get kind of where we're going with it and what the cost, so that we can start letting people know that that's gonna be available, and what services will be there. Will they have a screen that pulls down and they can do projections, or tie in a computer, or do a PowerPoint, or any of those type of things? Thanks.
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarre. So the furniture that is a part of the project will include conference table and chairs for the conference room itself. As far as what sort of technology will be available within that conference room, I'm not sure. Scott, Scott Curtin might have some idea what technology is going to be available. I do know that in addition to the table and chairs in the conference room, there's also, I believe, a dishwasher and a fridge that's going to be installed as well. So, Scott, do you know anything about the technology?
Mr. Curtin?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Ostrander, thank you. Yes, there is a dishwasher and a refrigerator planned for the space. We haven't acquired them yet. I actually have the cut sheets for you to review tomorrow. Actually, I picked those up from Dan's TV recently. Mary Bondurant and I, the airport manager, were in the space earlier this week, Tuesday, for our normal meeting, and we are looking at, we have not yet, but we're looking at acquiring a large monitor for the one wall to be used for multimedia presentations and things like that. It is all pre-wired. The system's pre-wired for accessing, internet and power and stuff for that. So it's all been put in with a plan to have those. We just haven't acquired the rest of the components. And as Paul mentioned, the furniture, the conference table and chairs and stuff will be included at a future date.
Thank you, Mr. Curtin.
I just have to comment, I don't understand the dishwasher. I just want to make that comment. I think that's a very bad move.
Any other, Councilmember Glendenning?
Yeah, even though I'm an old projects guy, I find there's a certain point where you don't micromanage the minutia, but good on you guys for having a conference room and with Wi-Fi, and it'll be a welcome addition to our airport, and thank you for supplying that.
Councilmember Knoxon?
I don't have a suggestion on the color of the dishwasher, but something we did talk about before was a new furnace for the terminal. That was not part of the original plan. It has a 5-year life, and I remember I think we're going to replace that, but I just wanted to make sure that was still in the works while we're doing everything else in that building.
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Nack said, we are trying to, right now, I know Scott's working with the consultant, trying to get that change order put together to allow the installation of a new boiler in the building. Whether or not that's going to happen or not is somewhat contingent on the availability of how much contingency is left in the project. So depending on where that comes in, we certainly would like to get it in the project. If not, We'll likely look to replace it at some point in the next 5 years. So it is still is our intent, if we can fit it within the contingency, the allowable contingencies, to get that replaced during the project.
Any other questions of the city manager? Councilmember Knoxon?
Just one last thing, different topic, was asked the other day, regarding, signage directing into Old Town, that we discussed some time ago. I was just wanting an update on that.
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Naxted. So Bob Frades has applied with DOT for the sign that's out on the highway directing folks into Old Town. As far as the additional signage in Old Town itself, we've actually been working with Divining Point to come up with essentially a style guide for what those signs should look like in Old Town. So we're still working through the process. It's still something we're planning on hopefully putting installing this summer. After we get a little bit further in the process, we'll also be able to determine what sort of budgetary numbers will be required to get those signs installed. But it is something we're continuing to work through. We'd like to incorporate some of the new logo and some of those things into that signage as well.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Just two things. Could you remind me again on March 10th, the budget goals, the public meeting, what time that is over at the senior center?
6 p.m.
6 p.m.?
Yes.
And then the bird excrement study that's going to be run by the non-government organization. How is that? What is the purpose of that when we really do know that that the pollution does come from a rookery, and we know that that effluent is going to be there. Why are they going to do that when we're considering maybe not even having that study carried on?
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. You know, I probably can't speak to this with a great deal of knowledge, but the beach model study that they're talking about is something that the EPA is pushing for areas that have indicated that there's some level of impairment. So in the case of here, there's some level of impairment that's been indicated by the past bacterial studies. The beach study is supposed to refine their knowledge of where that impairment exists. I'm confident that the Watershed Forum will be in here at some point, and that's probably an excellent question to ask them. Like I've stated in the past, you know, we do know now that there's bacteria, and we do know that it's from gulls. So the value of additional studies, again, I can't speak about it with great knowledge, but I do know that there's a beach model that they want to put together, and it's something that is a directive, maybe not a directive, but something that's been requested by EPA that now DEC is asking the Watershed Forum to support.
And just to follow up, then the findings from that beach study would be revealed to you before it's released to the newspaper. Is that going to be the understanding we have with them?
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. What I've asked is to have the ability to review any press releases before they're submitted. You know, as far as the scientific data that they have, I likely won't. I mean, I probably will be given an opportunity to look at it. Certainly won't have any ability to modify that. But if they provide a press release and some of the language in the narrative of the press release, I think reflects either misinformation or reflects poorly on the city, I'd like to have an opportunity to weigh in on that and see if they can modify.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilmember Navarro?
Is it possible to have a porta potty for the gulls out there like we do for our other residents? That might help too.
We just have to charge them for it.
You don't have any money.
Yeah. Any other questions of the city manager? Seeing none, City Attorney, Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. I don't have any comments, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions of the city attorney? Seeing none, we'll go to the city clerk, Ms. Hines.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. I sent you an email this week and just want to reiterate that I'm watching a few bills that are moving through the legislature that affect elections. And we'll keep you informed as those move through. And also the financial disclosures will be emailed out to you soon. Those are due April 15th. And if you would like last year's to help you fill that out, I'm happy to hand those to you as well.
Very good. And thank you for that. Now, which reminds me of something I was meaning to mention in my report is that I was going to have our human resources director to send out the blank evaluation forms for city employees, and then at our next meeting, put on the agenda to schedule a date for the evaluations. So something coming up. We usually do those about first to middle of April, so we'll be looking at about the same timeline there. Any questions of Ms. Hines? See none, we will go to additional public comment. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to address the council at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for council comments, and we'll start with, how about Councilmember Petty?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I had the pleasure of being at the chamber, and thank you, gentlemen, City Manager Ostrander and Mayor Gabriel, for such a wonderful explanation and reflection of our city. It was an honor to hear that. It was really good to see such a wonderful turnout for that. I wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow, Thursday, at the Kenai Fine Arts Center is the juried show, and I believe that opens at 5:30 tomorrow. And I hear it's a wonderful show, and would like to invite everyone to come out to be to cheer those folks on. And then also, I hear that there's some wonderful pies that are being created that will be donated for the March for Meals on March the 20th. So just a reminder for that. So thank you. That ends my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I have some slack in my shirt now for the March for Meal pies, so brace yourself. I will be there. On Saturday, February 29th, I attended the Soldotna Historical Society and Museum, and they had a presentation on the history of the Soberg House. If you recall, Soberg was actually a Norwegian immigrant that had a colorful past and wound up here in the Kenai area, and he built a lot of the Sterling Highway and constructed a lot of the bridges. And it was just really neat to hear it. I've read the books, but just to hear an oral presentation with a slideshow that explained it, and there was quite a few citizens of Soldotna in the area that were around at that time, and they had just really neat remembrances and input. And I was well rewarded by going to that. I also attended the Kenai Historical Society meeting, and our Parks and Rec department came there and gave us an update on the beautification program. Not only what their charter is to do, but also what their plans are for the summer. And it was very well presented, very well received, and there were good questions asked and answered. And again, I attended the chamber meeting today, and that was a very good presentation on the state of the city, and the presentation that was given on the overhead. Is that a prelude or a preview of what we will be seeing at some point in time? My question, or City Manager.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning. It's a very similar presentation that you'll see on March 10th at the community meeting at the Senior Center at 6 p.m. That's probably the two times it'll be presented, was today and then on March 10th.
Okay, well, thank you. That was in a very inviting format, and that ends my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank our streets department for doing such a good job of keeping the snow off the roads. We've had a lot of snow this year, and I think they've been doing a great job. And with the sidewalks and the bike paths and everything. The other thing I'd like to mention is our hometown junior A hockey team is back, and in third place in our division and gonna play Friday and Saturday night, the Kenai River Brown Bears. So if any of you guys are out and about, it'd be a good event to come and watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess, I too thought the city manager and the mayor did a great job today at city council. I mean, at chamber. And, I too, as the mayor stated, read to first graders, third graders, and fourth graders, I think, were my age group at Mountain View. So if you ever get an opportunity to read to the kiddos, it's a great opportunity. And with that, I'll end my comments for the night.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a great second grade class over there. That was really fun. That was my first one. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. And yeah, I also was at the chamber luncheon and wanted to thank you and city manager for a really good presentation. A lot of work went into that. And it was really well organized and presented, and the people were, very much interested. Good questions, too, and everything. Also, because I was absent at the last meeting, I didn't have the opportunity to thank you and the city manager for your representation at the Board of Fish. And again, I know you have to take a lot of time to, do what you do for the city of Kenai, and appreciate all the hard work you do as mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Naxted.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to the March of Vermeil's pie auction, and like always, I'm the one that brings the cake. And pineapple upside down cake, but it's almost like a pie. And I see that Mr. Dwayne Bannock is here in our audience, and I think he will most likely be the auctioneer once again and all that, and that also helps with the success of that function. So I want to thank Dwayne publicly now for what he's done in the past and what he's going to be doing. I wanted to explain, I apologize for not being at the last meeting. We're calling in. It was my intent, and it was completely out of cell service at the moment. But I did have a resolution that you all took up that were here, and I appreciate the support on that, supporting legislation regarding the Civil Air Patrol. And I wanted to thank Jim also for covering the planning and zoning for the other two meetings, which I did know I was going to miss. So it just sort of worked out that way. So I'm kind of back in town and not going to be missing anything much for a while. Although I did miss today's presentation at the chamber. I think I'll probably hear that in the future, but I had scheduled the Caring for the Kenai, so I was doing that all day. So we established the 12 highest ranking projects, and those projects will be published at some point. And I did it last year too, and had a great time doing it. So look forward to it today. And the last thing was I was at the Kenai Historical Society, and Bob Freitas was there to do the presentation. Not the entire department, but just Bob, which is a pretty good show, and he did a very good job for the city, and it was entertaining and informative. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have item L, executive session. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to convene this city council of the city of Kenai in executive session to discuss a request to purchase properties located at 11823 Kenai Spur Highway, Kenai, Alaska, also known as Anchor Campground, pursuant to AS 44-62-310C13, is a matter of which the immediate knowledge may have an adverse effect upon the finances of the city, and a matter by which law, municipal charter, ordinance are required to be confidential. Request that the city manager attend. Who else would you like?
Probably the city attorney also.
And the city attorney as needed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Naxtet,
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning,
Yes.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
call our meeting back to order. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. The city council met in executive session and had a discussion and gave directions to the city manager on the request to purchase properties located at 11823 Kenai Spur Highway, Kenai, Alaska, also known as Agri Campground.
Thank you. Seeing no other business before this body, we are adjourned.